Oh,
we're recording too.
Yes.
So I hear. Yes. So the robot tells me.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're so reliant on these robots these days.
I assume when we're doing Q&A from the Twitch stream, you guys will be reading them to me since I'm not seeing that.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Test is cleared. Oh, somebody, we just tested.
Oh, yeah, I saw your test.
So
Cool.
just confirming that it's
Awesome.
still working.
All right. You're...
Oh.
I'm gonna tweet it out as well,
Okay,
so
awesome.
nobody else do that.
Excellent, yes. And I feel like more professional channels use like a loading screen at this point in the stream, but
well,
that's for them.
How can you be professional when you haven't even launched and gotten any money to be professional?
That's true.
Exactly
That's true. My pedantic nerdery about like what makes you a professional does prevent me from calling myself a professional editor at this point. I am not technically getting paid. It's one of those things one of those little history stories I like to tell people is that there's a period in early modern scientific progress where amateur scientists were considered much more reliable than professional scientists.
I was about to say we are a magazine of enthusiastic amateurs. It's like nobody here is a professional at what we're doing. Well, I guess. Yeah, no, we're at least in the sense of like I don't know, the stuff that we write about.
It's funny we started the other stream with this like stream of this line of thought briefly, but we're all just multifaceted, or we all just have multiple interests.
Whoever just sent out the tweet, you just announced that it goes live in an hour instead of going live now.
Oh no.
Oh dear. Okay.
So you'll want to delete that and try again.
How did that happen?
Well, welcome to everybody who's here. That's really exciting that folks are streaming in. I see a couple names in there.
Excellent. Yes, for the people who are joining us, we're going to wait. Probably we're going to shoot the shit for about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll get started. Let some people stream in, let our tweets propagate through the Twitterverse. Thank you for joining us, those of you who are joining us. I'll continue to be.
So if you all want to make yourself like a cup of coffee or tea, or put on your lunchtime cooking,
your beer, your hot cocoa.
Me, I've just got water because I was considering popping open a beer, but I thought that it would be indiscreet to be drinking alcohol on an official
business stream. Yes, yeah. So very official. Very official, wearing your red cap indoors.
Yeah, I know, right? Well,
Yeah.
It's because I'm hiding my hair, which is looking awful today. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of just antsy to get started. To be perfectly honest.
Let's give it 5 minutes.
Yeah. Apologies to those of you waiting here.
Maybe less. Oh, I see 8 people though.
Yeah.
8. I only see 1, 2, 3.
10 people.
What?
Yes, 10.
There's a little red number underneath the Zoom.
Remember,
Twitch,
some of those are us.
Oh.
Yeah,
one of them is me.
Yes, of course. Of course.
This is actually much more competent than the last one that we
Yeah.
held. So
wonderful.
We're improving exponentially, and the third stream will be semi-professional.
Yeah, we're in the it's part of our branding that we're the magazine that doesn't know how to use Twitch.
I'm sure that will distinguish us greatly. I'm sure that there's so many who know how to use Twitch.
every other magazine out there, absolute masters of Twitch. You're the
Yeah,
only
yeah.
ones.
That's totally distinctive about us.
This is
We're
part
the
of
only
differentiation.
people-
Yeah, no,
everybody else has completely mastered new media. We're the
Right,
one
like-
laggards who are sticking to
and
it.
N+1, literally the top streamers out there.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone like floods them
You know,
for their Among Us, and then
Yeah,
you guys.
absolutely. Like PewDiePie has got nothing on freaking Dana Tortorici.
Yeah.
The also I just noticed that Francis, the thing that I said before actually is true. If you turn off the camera, you disappear from the stream. I just noticed on the Twitch stream. So that hypothesis is confirmed about how it works.
Although, if I do pipe up with questions occasionally, like it may be a bit weird to have like this disembodied voice coming through.
Oh
the
yeah,
ether.
no. Yeah, let's
it's not
move
rules,
on, I
rules.
guess.
It's like having a. We need to get you a robot voice filter. So it's like a like a nuclear warning or something like that.
Yeah.
Fire escape.
Or like
Semiconductor.
a rogue AI in
Yeah.
cyberpunk anime, right? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good transition.
there we go. Yeah. I'm trying to.
I just rewatched Ghost in the Shell recently, and the scene where God, what's it called? The game master, whatever, like the AI like announces itself, it's just so cool.
Mhm.
All right. Should we get started soon?
Yeah. I'm Anthony to get started. As I said before. So hello, everybody. I'm Kyle Flannery, he, they, editor with Strange Matters magazine. And today we're doing a bit of a live stream about cyberpunk. Because one of our guest contributors, Elizabeth Sandifer, wrote a truly excellent article reviewing 3 different recent cyberpunk media, not going old school, going to the present and seeing what we're still doing with this long genre, and putting the pieces in conversation with each other and seeing what thematic things shake out in her analysis. And it's a wonderful piece. I am very proud to have gotten the chance to review and publish it. Yeah, we're here to have a discussion about the piece and about cyberpunk more generally, and about how we're launching this magazine. So, like I said, I'm Kyle Flannery, he, they, culture editor. Pleasure to meet y'all.
And I will just add a couple of comments by way of introduction. So we're going to be kind of talking, having a general loose conversation with Elizabeth to start. And then we want to really open it up to y'all's questions. And unlike last time, this time our stream chat is working. We confirmed. We can in fact see what you type in there. So if you want to give us a shout out and say hello and ask your questions, feel free to, and we'll try to get to all of them in the Q&A. Or if you have a burning question, you can put it in. We'll try to integrate it into the main kind of conversation. The other thing that you should know about this piece is that it's the first instantiation of what will hopefully be a recurring feature in the magazine, which is called the Triple. It's a wonderful kind of section that where the writer can review 3 of anything. It can be any combination of media, genre, etc. You can review, say, an art exhibition and a prestige TV show and a video game together, as long as you tell some kind of story that threads them all together in some interesting way. So Elizabeth helped us not only in writing the first triple, but also in like ideating the concept of it. I think that her review is wonderful. So I'm really excited to share it with all of you today.
Also introduce yourself, JMC.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is John Michael Cologne. My friends call me JMC, pronouns he, him. And I'm a co-editor and co-founder of Strange Matters.
Introduce myself too. I'm Steve Mann. I'm also a co-editor on Strange Matters. Yeah.
And I guess I should probably introduce myself too. I'm Francis Steer. I'm also a co-editor.
And
right. I think that leaves me. I'm Elizabeth Sanderfer. I wrote the feature we're talking about on cyberpunk stuff today. The rest of the time, I'm a independent writer of tons of different stuff, mostly media criticism at my website, eruditorumpress.com, which I picked because it was really like easy to intuitively spell when you hear it. And, you know, no, it was a terrible name. I mostly funded on Patreon. I've also gotten into some fiction stuff. I'm writing a comic called Britain, a Prophecy, and I'm working on some other fiction stuff these days.
Yes. I was going to say, yeah. Elizabeth has been a professional writer for some time and written some works that have been very inspiring to some of us writers here at Strange Matters. And your current projects are, like you said, Britain, a Prophecy, and The Last War in Albion, which is a truly Titanic, I think, is too small of a word. Vast beyond the concept of size.
Yeah, it's a history of British comic books, specifically looking at the rivalry and feud between the writers Alan Moore and Grant Morrison through the lens, but using the lens. Both of them are openly occultists and magicians, so I'm treating their comic book writing and rivalry as a magical war for the soul of Britain in the 21st century.
I love that.
It's incredible stuff. The recent one was about like Flex Mantello, right?
Yeah, Flex Mentallo's debut in Doom Patrol. I'll get to that, the 4-issue miniseries, in a couple of years at the rate this thing goes. But it's a very dense project in which I follow a willfully perverse urge to, anytime there is a tangent, follow that tangent to the bitter end. So it's, nominally about British comics, but it veers off all over the place. A few chapters ago, I had a entire blog post about extremely cringy trans erotica of the mid 90s online. Like the most cringeworthy trans erotica from like the earliest days of Usenet in like 1994, 1995. I went and just did 2,000 words on that in the middle of my history of British comics and made my readers suffer through it because it amused me.
Yes, and I suppose that is ultimately the most appealing thing about your writing, is that you just openly make your readers suffer and they pay you for it. And yes, what more could we want from a business model?
Right. No, I mean, it's wonderful. I fund what I do through Patreon, so I'm really pretty editorially independent. I get to follow whatever whims, dreams, and absurd ideas I have and just do what I want to do with it, which is good because it lets me do things that, you know, even the nice people at Strange Matters, if I tried to pitch them on it, would look at it and go, I don't think we can sell that.
Well, thankfully, we don't really care about whether we can sell it as long as it's good. So that's
right. Or like,
yeah, we have a perverse faith in our readers' ability to discern quality.
Yeah, I mean, you did turn over your inaugural triple feature to me, so you've clearly got some sense of pure sadism. But
I also wanted to highlight, since Elizabeth was too modest to bring it up before, that in addition to being a culture critic, a writer on technology, and a very witty essayist, Elizabeth is also the author of what, at least for me and my friend group, is a kind of like cult classic of 2010's anti-fascism, namely the book Neo-Reaction: A Basilisk, which, if you haven't read it, you can find it online relatively easily, and it's and of course also order it from the small press that issued it. And it is a really wonderful and like in-depth takedown of a lot of the fascist intellectuals of the 2010s, kind of before they blew up too. Interestingly, it was a very early critique of people like Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land that inspired the kind of what eventually came to be known as the alt-right. It's really, I don't think it's actually been exceeded in terms of like the level of depth with which it engages with and then refutes those toxic ideologies. So highly recommend that to anybody who's interested in the kind of nexus of like radical politics, anti-fascism, and technology.
And extreme, just like perverse focus. That was one, I remember writing that book. My wife just kept looking at me like, what are you doing and why do you think anyone is going to buy this? And it turned out to be my best-selling book and the most popular thing I've ever written. But yeah, trying to explain to anybody what the hell I was doing with that book while I was still doing it was quite an effort.
it's really remarkable that you managed to make all those threads come together. It's a real achievement. Your obsession with William Blake does in fact pay off.
Thank you. No, it's something of a personal joke that I will try to work a William Blake reference into everything I do at some point. I'm just going to get Blake in there somewhere. Yeah, like it's sort of like oh yeah, and here's the chorus coming. She's brought up Urizen, and we're going in depth on America, a prophecy again.
Yeah, of course. Excellent stuff. I feel like I should give that a reread, and maybe give Blake a reread one of these days. So let's talk about the piece a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of like the sort of like most basic question is, cyberpunk for so many of us is very much like a retro futurist, like nostalgic obsession. When you ask people what are the good cyberpunks, they almost always say, Neuromancer and Snow Crash. They keep on going back to the 80s.
And in a real sense, I would argue the genre kind of hit its natural endpoint in 99 with the Matrix. Like you've got the Millennium coming, and then you have the Matrix just perfecting the aesthetic of cyberpunk and doing everything you could possibly want out of cyberpunk in the most thrillingly populist way possible. And there was absolutely no reason to do any cyberpunk again after the Matrix. And here we are a quarter century later, still doing cyberpunk.
Yeah, still doing cyberpunk.
Because as it turned out, cyberpunk was the one time that science fiction ever actually predicted the future.
And not in like
sucks.
and not in like the sort of like obtuse broad way that a lot of science fiction has predicted the future. Like you can talk about like Frankenstein and Rossum's Universal Robots having predicted like how capitalism would try to like mechanize people and reduce them to paste that they could mold and shape, but like that's very broad. Cyberpunk was like, oh yeah, we're going to carry our computers on us. And it very directly did that.
It both got a huge amount of the material aspects of the future right, but also just got a lot of the corporate hellscape aspects of the future right. Like you open Neuromancer and it really, other than the ways in which it feels more 1984 than anything could possibly feel, it doesn't feel 1984 at all. Like the book is a complete dead split between feels entirely of its time and feels entirely contemporary with nothing else in it.
Well, I was going to ask one question, but I'm going to ask a different question now. Sure. How much do you think that it predicted the future, and how much do you think it created the future?
I mean, cyberpunk was mostly a negative prediction, so I'm inclined to not give it too much credit for creating. I mean, there is I remember the internet, the meme going around on Twitter, tech company, we've perfected the torment nexus from the popular novel, Oh God, Don't Create the Torment Nexus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And certainly you look at, Facebook's entire rebranding as Meta, and the metaverse is literally just ripped out of Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Like that is literally just fanboyish reading of a cyberpunk novel and going, we're gonna do it.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
There's a degree to which, yes, cyberpunk clearly inspired some idiot tech bros to do exactly the thing it was telling them not to do. But I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it was prediction. I think a lot of it was that, early authors like Gibson and Sterling and Stevenson looked at the rise of personal computing in the 80s and early 90s and went, this is the thing. That whole space travel thing that this genre has been doing for 50 years, total crap, actually, this is the real thing.
And what's interesting, oops, sorry,
Go ahead, James.
So what's interesting to me about your piece, though, is very much its attitude that not all cyberpunk is made equal, right? Like there's this kind of I think that it's really interesting, like how you begin the critique, you begin the article with the critique of the cyberpunk video game that was made by the studio that made The Witcher, and I forget their name.
CD Projekt Red.
CD Projekt, yeah. And they and you kind of call it the dad rock of cyberpunk. Can you elaborate on what you mean by the dad rock of cyberpunk?
Yeah. So that game is drawing from a specific cyberpunk role-playing game, like a Dungeons and Dragons style throw dice at a table role-playing game called just Cyberpunk. The first version of it was set in the futuristic year of 2013, if I recall. It was drawing from, the kind of pool of cyberpunk novels that you had at the time. So it drew a really big concept from this novel that no one talks about anymore, the A Song Called Youth trilogy by John Shirley. The first book, I think is called Eclipse or something like that. I forget the first book name, but A Song Called Youth by John Shirley. And one of the main viewpoint characters in that novel was this kind of old school rock star. Like he was doing like classic rock music and being rebellious about it in this cyberpunk future. And this game drew on that, and, made one of its kind of character classes the rocker boy. And you can see exactly where, from the only 2 or 3 dozen cyberpunk novels they had to draw on, they got this concept from Shirley, A Song Called Youth. Shirley was William Gibson's mentor. He was a really big, important figure who just kind of isn't all that well remembered as a classic. They created, and then they had this demo adventure, which featured the character of Johnny Silverhands, whose character class was the rocker boy. And then just, Cyberpunk, this RPG, became a thing. It's gone through, I think, 4 editions now. And Johnny Silverhands became its kind of signature character, because he was the character who was in that demo adventure written in the middle of the 80s, ripping off this specific novel. And it became this weird kind of atavistic artifact in the role-playing game, as everything else in the role-playing game kind of advanced to grab new trends in cyberpunk. This one signature character was weirdly rooted in this arbitrary decision of the mid-80s that just stuck in. And so when CD Projekt Red got the license to this role-playing game and made their big, giant, terrible AAA game, they dutifully cast Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhands and built the story around the sort of Johnny Silverhands mythos. So you've got this ultra futuristic, neon, very classic cyberpunk aesthetic in this game that keeps jumping back to this aging white guy rock star who's just the classical bad boy trash the hotel room rock star character who, because of the mythos of the game and this weird thing, is treated as this messianic figure of rebellion, despite the white guy rocker as messianic figure of rebellion being the most gated boomer bullshit possible. So yeah, that gives the game a really weird tone, and a ton of the missions in the game are named after random classic rock songs. You've got a mission called "Don't Fear the Reaper" and stuff like that. That's the one I can remember. I have a whole list of them in the article, and it's just a nice deadening oh my god, this, for a game about the future, this sure is your dad's CD collection.
So just to follow up on that, if science fiction is about predicting the future, at least Cyberpunk's virtue is that it did, why do you think that CD Projekt kind of tried in so hard to lean on these kind of old cyberpunk, the backwards looking kind of cyberpunk tropes? What do you think motivates a move like that?
Well, what's interesting about cyberpunk is, on the one hand, it's the genre that got it right. It's the genre that successfully predicted the future, but it is still a period piece that one can be retro about. I said you read Neuromancer and it's a dead even split between feeling entirely present and of its time right now and feeling like the most mid-80s thing possible. And that's extremely true of a lot of classic era cyberpunk. On the one hand, it's extremely prescient in a way that, frankly, science fiction likes to imagine itself being, but usually isn't. But on the other hand, it's still really fucking dated 80s and 90s stuff. It feels like it comes out of the 80s and 90s. So you've got this weird tension in cyberpunk between this forward-looking, this is the science fiction that describes the present day. You know, you can, it's interesting that William Gibson, when he hit the 21st century and started writing his third trilogy of books, the Blue Ant trilogy, those are still, you know, you go to the bookstore and you'll find them shelved in the science fiction section. They're still with all of those other things, but there were no futuristic concepts in them. These books were entirely contemporary set thrillers about post 9/11 world, and they're still cyberpunk. You know, cyberpunk, the world catches up with cyberpunk, and it becomes the case that you can just do cyberpunk with no futuristic conceits whatsoever. But it's also simultaneously still this weird retro thing. And that's a kind of weird dualism of cyberpunk. It's on the one hand, viscerally describing the present day, and on the other hand is this delightedly dated thing.
Steve, did you have something?
Oh, I liked in your piece that you have like, you had this point of like, we were kind of promised one dystopia in cyberpunk, but we were given another one that is just kind of
the
comparatively boring.
Right. The central lie of cyberpunk was that the future was going to be at all cool. And it turns out that it actually just sucks. It's exactly as described, except wildly less cool.
Right.
You know, one of the writers who's most influential on cyberpunk was J.G. Ballard. You know, if you want to pick some books and look at them as proto cyberpunk, going back to like J.G. Ballard's High Rise and Crash
novel. Yeah.
Both of them. Those are very kind of like cyberpunk a decade or two early. And J.G. Ballard's great prediction that, you know, if I had to sum up the future in one word, it would be boring. The future is going to be boring. And man, that's the prediction that turned out to be true. You know, we have the corporate dominated future where we're all on our, you know, extremely portable computers that follow us everywhere. You know, we have cyberspace and the web, we have virtual reality. It's all exactly as cyberpunk predicted. The only thing that isn't there are the like, it turns out we're not all wearing leather and mirror shades and hacking into systems and overthrowing the evil corporations. That bit didn't pan out. And that was kind of the glue that held the whole thing together.
That was yeah. Me and Steve were kind of discussing that when we were doing the earlier testing, that there's a sort of like bourgeois fantasy in cyberpunk that like if things got bad enough, I would turn around and be a badass. But
right,
sort of like,
it's described incredibly memorably in Snow Crash. Neil Stephenson has this great riff about like, until the age of 25, every man believes that in the exact right circumstances he could become the biggest badass there ever was.
Oh, absolutely. It's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Right,
and it's all
it's a great riff.
Yeah, and the thing about the future having caught up to cyberpunk and having lived in this, like now that we live in cyberpunk, we're now put into like this weird dual vision where most of us recognize that like if we were in Shadowrun, we would be the corpro guy. We would be we would be the person who shows up to a faceless corporate job, and the closest we get to being the protagonist is we get held hostage by a Shadowrunner. Not that we are the Shadowrunner.
Right. I mean, this was the I think you know, one of the best bits of the new Matrix movie was, you know, it takes Neo, the revolutionary hacker, and it's like, nope, you're a corporate suit now. That's how it actually turns out for you.
And in the real world, right, that did happen, right? Because like all the hackers who would have been like hacking and taking down all the evil corporations, I mean, you know, some people tried to do that, but like anonymous or whatever. But like, I mean, what it ended up being was that they all started working for the NSA, the Internet Research Agency, and the 50 Cent Army, you know? Like,
right.
To be fair, many of them... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And I mean, some of the people who were like most inspired by those stories of revolutionary hackers are like, you know, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Those are the actual revolutionary hackers we got, and it sucks. It's terrible.
It does suck. And it's kind of like a kind of fun counterpoint. There is a YouTube channel that I follow is the Wild West Hacking Fest, and it is active freelance hackers who are doing Zoom conference calls about like physical penetration stuff and like how to like security vulnerabilities and how to exploit them. But for them, this is like it's not got the tone of like a revolutionary movement. It is very much the tone of a professional guild doing training. Like these are mostly like middle-aged white men and women doing very straightforward Zoom talks, complete with like that, like the same pace of like corporate jokes. It just happens to be about like how to exploit a security vulnerability to a bank, really not with the goal of like taking it down, but with the goal of like getting a bug hunt bounty.
And if they don't sound like corporate, they sound like signal intelligence people, which is
yeah. They're like, these are tradesmen, you know, they're
You mentioned the bourgeois fantasy of cyberpunk. It strikes me that the other big fantasy of cyberpunk was the idea of information and data being somehow having some sort of totemic power. A ton of cyberpunk is based around the idea that if you can only, release the secret file that's held on this server somewhere, then the evil corporation will go toppling down. One of the things cyberpunk did not do a nearly adequate enough job of predicting was disinformation campaigns. And the breakdown of consensus reality is a thing that we can discuss in media.
I can think of one piece of cyberpunk fiction that absolutely nailed that, and that's Metal Gear Solid 2, which has the substantial problem of being extremely dumb. Like,
yes,
that's the problem. That's why I cringed when you said it, because it's like, well, yes, but
I mean, Gibson got there. Gibson gets there in some of his later work. But the writers who get there mostly get there after in the 21st century, after it became evident that this was actually the way it was going. You look at 80s and 90s cyberpunk, you don't actually see a ton of people who are really predicting what's going to happen with media very well.
Well, it's kind of a bit interesting that it wasn't foreseen, because I tend to read a lot of, I tend to be more of like a history and anthropology guy as a matter of training, and one of the things that people will look back on history, will look back on a historical period, and they'll be kind of surprised by, is that like this empire is crumbling, and the people of Rome or Persepolis or wherever you choose, they're more concerned about horse breeding. That's like what the history books we have from the contemporary period are like, oh, like here's how like my racing horse turned out this year, or these are the newest fashion cuts. Like the 30 Years' War would have occasional pauses so that like the Madame of Paris could come through, which is a clothing doll with the latest Parisian like these apocalypses would be happening, and people would just be like concerned with like these very like low level consumer culture things, and people are like, well, how is that possible? And we just have not internalized the lesson that like that's what people are going to do during an apocalypse. Like the thing, something being like a pressing truth doesn't actually cause it to be like a more compelling form of information.
Knowledge turns out to be pretty fucking useless, actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Panama Papers revealed more than God can say about the evil the powerful are doing, and one person got murdered over it, and that was it.
Right.
To pull a thread that Elizabeth said before, which is you mentioned that the hackers that we got, rather than the hackers that we deserved, are the kind of like, Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg kind of universe. That I can't help but think that kind of takes us to the second piece that you reviewed in the triple, which was devs, which, if the first one was like dad rock, this one is kind of projecting from the present Silicon Valley moment. What interested you about that show?
I came to it just because I really liked it's written and directed by Alex Garland, and I just loved his two prior movies. Ex Machina is, I think, one of the best kind of modern cyberpunk movies. And I just totally have a soft spot for Annihilation in all of its people becoming trees, weird fiction glory. So I really liked it, and I just checked. So he's doing a TV series, I'll check that out. if there's a pandemic on, what the fuck else am I going to do? And it's this very contemporary set techno thriller. It has a sci-fi conceit, but that sci-fi conceit sort of seeps in over the first few episodes. It takes a while before you realize the full scope of what's going on, which is that the tech company has built a computer that seems to be able to completely predict the future because they believe the universe to be wholly deterministic. It kind of disappears up its own ass in a very boring determinism versus free will thing at the end of the day. Which I guess if you're really interested in that, it does great, but I'm not. But it is really interesting as a, well done, very, very lush, gorgeous, clever piece of cyberpunk that is about 95% just normal contemporary world.
The aesthetics are truly incredible. I do fully agree with you.
They have this series of just like almost pornographic shots of their central set, and the set is absolutely gorgeous enough to deserve it.
Well, and the thing that one of those things that, like, a small thing that kind of hit me about that central set is that it looks extremely like a real place that I've been to, which is the most menacing building I've ever been inside of, the business school at the University of Chicago.
Oh God, yeah.
Which has the most fuck vibes of any physical location I've been to. Just absolutely terrifying. And it's the business school at the University of Chicago. So
yeah.
Oddly enough, the building on my college campus that it reminds me most of is the Orphe building. It's kind of like opulence and like gold platedness.
I like that you called attention to the fact that it's the entire, like, the secret places on a magnetic gimbal system.
Yeah.
And it's like there's like a maglev elevator that takes you to it.
Yeah, and they do a very big like Chekhov's maglev elevator. They like do tons of like long shots of the maglev elevator gracefully gliding through the air gap to the secretive data within, and all of that is set up the like giant climactic set piece where inevitably the maglev elevator collapses and everybody dies.
Well, the thing about that maglev is that it kind of felt like it was supposed to be symbolizing to us that like what happens beyond that is not just air gap from the rest of the world, but air gap from like any sort of like reasonable interpretation of reality. That, like almost everything that happens outside of that air gap is very contemporary and is stuff that like you can believe in, and then you get inside that air gap and it is some science stuff that is just off the wall. And it does seem to be separated out from the rest of the world. Everybody else is just kind of dealing with like, it's like a theological black box that everybody else has been having like theology debates about in the rest of the universe.
So one of the things... Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that you mentioned is that the devs is compelling because of the way that it kind of depicts how a tech company working on some project can develop this kind of cult of personality and also a kind of ideological cult around like the pet beliefs of the leader, the CEO, and you compared it to a real world movement, which is the Rationalist movement founded by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Could you explain like what the company in devs does and kind of like what the cult is and why you made that comparison?
Yeah, so the company is a quantum computing company, and its big secret project is this computer that can absolutely accurately predict the future and go back and vividly watch any moment of the past. They can get absolute crisp video of Jesus on the cross or whatever, and they do that set piece. This becomes a genuine like religious cult thing because the driving factor of it is the tech CEO wants to see his dead daughter again, and so he has wholly invested in an idea of a deterministic universe, because in a many worlds universe, any daughter he could see wouldn't be his; it would be a daughter from another universe, and he becomes zealous about the idea that the universe is entirely deterministic. It's a mechanistic universe, which is ironically the exact opposite of where Eliezer Yudkowsky, this very, very influential crackpot, basically, who is
Good way to put
hugely,
it, yeah.
like hugely influential in tech bro circles, but doesn't actually know anything about coding. He is an AI expert, quote unquote, but he doesn't code AIs or do computer science. And he's a firm believer in the many worlds hypothesis. And his kind of driving thing, if you look at him in any detail, is he's absolutely terrified of death and he wants to be reincarnated on a computer so that he can live forever. And he and Forrest, the guy in Devs, played by Nick Offerman. Yeah, Nick Offerman, in one of those brilliant cast a comedic actor in a dramatic role and watch it go wonderfully for you moves. They both have a similar kind of obsession with death and way in which they let these like religious spiritual needs completely drive their epistemology and how they think technology relates.
Yeah, Yudkowsky is a really kind of fascinating figure in a terrible way, because, as you said, he's an idiot.
Yes.
And he seems to have gotten more influential.
Yes, which is weird. Though, I mean, I'll make JMC happy and talk about neo-reaction and basilisk here, because one of the big contentions I end up having about neo-reaction and really the kind of alt-right tech libertarian scene in general is that the defining trait of them all is that they are fucking idiots. Peter Thiel is not actually a secret genius. Peter Thiel is a dumbass. Peter Thiel is a dumbass with a lot of money, and it turns out that money can obviate the need to know what you're doing. So yeah, there is this very big kind of tech cult element. I mean, you can see it around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as well. It's just this absolute carnival of complete morons who are ignoring the obvious fact that this is useless technology that does fuck all and burns vast quantities of fossil fuel to do it.
You figured out how to run a bad SQL server that cost $1 billion. Like, why did you do this? Like,
and you know what's fascinating about that comparison? It's not to zoom in on that one line in the essay, but it's just it resonated with me because, like, I think about something like Roko's Basilisk. Like, you have this entire community around Yudkowsky, the less wrong rationalist community, that basically believe that with an understanding of Bayesian inference and like cognitive biases, you can basically just like undo all the kind of like fallacies in human thinking and be like as rational as possible. But then like they'll rationalize themselves into thinking that because the rise of like general artificial intelligence and super intelligence is possible, it must happen. Super intelligence is basically like unlimited in its capabilities by the definition of it that they've done tautologically. So super intelligence will come into being. And if it does, and you didn't help it come into being, then you'll be tortured by it eternally, and it'll create a simulation of you that it'll torture eternally or whatever, like, in order to like punish you for not having helped in create it, because that's also how a super intelligence would act. And because like it follows from the axioms that they laid out. There's actually like they treat it like it's like an actual like threat to even say this, because like, you know, because it's almost like the old Christian thing where, you know, if it's actually worse for someone to be a pagan than for somebody to have heard the missionaries' description of Jesus and then rejected it. That's actually worse.
Right.
In hell in the second case and not in the first case. So it's the same kind of logic as Christianity, and not just Christianity, but the most kind of like, you know, like brutal and stupid Christianity, and like as opposed to like, you know, the more humane forms. And it's just like there's no self-awareness about this sort of thing, or very little of it in these communities. They really think that, like, you know, they're the ones who are kind of like at the cutting edge of, you know, human knowledge and figuring out how this stuff is going to work, usually through this kind of like almost like deductive kind of method. I was wondering, like, I don't know, how do you fight against that, and the way that it empowers like these like kind of guru leaders to be figures of authority as a result of these kinds of.
We appear to have a question in the chat for you about that, so I'm going to let you take that out before we move off that topic.
Oh, this is for James C. Says Tim, are you basically saying that they've created the Catholic God? Yeah, I mean, the Catholic God as interpreted by like the worst Catholic theologians. Yeah, I would say. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, if you look at Rovo's Basilisk, it really is a bunch of nerds accidentally create Pascal's wager and then just like have nightmares about it.
Right.
So yeah, that's funny.
Somebody in the chat said that.
And then it brought Elon Musk and Grimes together just to get funnier. Yeah. What was your question, James?
Well, what's the antidote to that? Like, how do we fight
Right.
against it and prevent these cults of personality around authority figures from sprouting up around these kinds of?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious and grimly plausible answer is we might just all be about to die. But if I were to try to craft a strategy, I mean, this is what I address in New Reaction to Basilisk, and the conclusion I come to is roughly one of playing an extremely long game. I don't think that we can stop these people in the short terms without a mass revolutionary movement of the sort that seems, in the wake of the Trump era, horrifyingly implausible. You know, a thing I've observed before is that for anyone who is who like wants to pin their hopes on a revolutionary solution, the fact that there were no assassination attempts against Trump is extremely grim. Like whether or not, and I'm not even saying this as like a pro-assassination argument, like whether or not
absolutely not. No,
violence,
no. To be clear here,
right.
we are not. Nobody here is
endorsing politicians.
Right. Like, even if you come at that from an entirely pacifist perspective, the fact that no such effort existed means, to me, you have to radically revise your opinions of the probability of revolutionary action actually happening. You know, that we went through all 4 years of that and no crazy revolutionary took a shot tells me that there are a lot less crazed revolutionaries willing to attempt single dramatic actions than one might have hoped. You know, and the lack of that to me makes a host of other revolutionary actions also seem very implausible. So in the absence of a really good short-term solution, I think all you can kind of do is try to make ideas and possibilities that will make the reactionary tech bro future fall apart eventually. You have to kind of play a long game. The thing that I turn to in my memory to give me kind of the most hope, the futurist Douglas Rushkoff has an essay he wrote a bit ago, a few years ago now, where he talks about how he was paid tens of thousands of dollars to do a couple-hour seminar for like 6 ultra-rich tech billionaires He doesn't name them, but what they really wanted to ask him about was the kind of post-apocalyptic, post-the event moment when they're all holed up in their bunkers, being survivalists, and the billionaire escape bunkers. And the thing they really desperately wanted to ask him that they could not figure out about how to make this work, and so we're paying him tens of thousands of dollars, is how do we keep our security guards from killing us and taking our food?
I read that.
I remember that.
And Rushkoff was just like, you don't. This is why your idea is stupid.
And also, grown where, in the missile bunker in New Zealand? Like, are you like? It's like,
yeah, like and this is that is roughly where I find some measure of hope. I think that the fact that the people who are driving this apocalypse are stupid, and what they want is going to fall apart very badly, means that it's sort of, as long as we can keep interesting leftist weird ideas surviving for the next couple of decades, the long game remains interesting to me. I think that there is long game hope after some very fucking terrible things. Like the bright side is that it might only be a couple of billion people dying horribly as the tech bros get their way. It might not be complete human extinction and the apocalypse of all leftist ideas. We might have something good for a couple of survivors down the line. I'm very happy. I make the world full of cheer and joy.
I think tagging on to that, although the average age of a Silicon Valley funded founder is like 37, the average age of the people giving them seed money is closer to 60.
Yeah.
And so they have, so it could be idiots being whispered into the ear by larger idiots who might exacerbate the process.
Right. Like, the Tech Bro project is going to fall apart. It is very, very stupid, and it is going to fall apart. I have no doubt whatsoever on that. Like, in terms of how do we make these charismatic idiots fail, we don't have to. They're idiots. They're going to take care of that part on their own. The part I'm worried about and that I don't have a good answer is how do we keep them from killing billions of people in the process? I got nothing. It looks really bad on that front.
Yeah. But when I listen to the aforementioned investors talk about technology, they turn technology into a god in a similar way as the founders, who they're really excited about, turn specific algorithms into gods. And you'll hear people on CNBC try to reassure their income and wealth cohort that this decade is actually going to be a breakaway one in terms of productivity growth because of emergent technologies, which will revitalize the American economy, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, okay, if the wellspring of all of this is education, then no, it won't.
Right.
If education is supported by a welfare state or something like that, then no, I don't see that happening.
Right. Yeah. It comes back to Rushkoff's observation. In a lot of cases, what these people are hoping for is that they'll be able to replace labor with various forms of automation, and then the poor people will all just conveniently die, and they'll be able to carry on being rich without them.
Right, and
that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is that they get eaten instead.
The ways in which they say automation will happen are just not happening. Right. There's certain types, like automation of data processes, sure. Automation of physical processes within 3 dimensions, no.
Yeah, my understanding is that for all of the scary and impressive footage of the Boston Dynamics robots, you can push them over pretty easily. As long as you if you can lure them onto a muddy hill, they're fucked.
Yeah, and Black Mirror, to its credit, gave us that one episode that shows ways to defeat the dog.
Yeah,
so there's that too. If the dog got rapidly better in 10 years, you could go back to that and watch it.
Right, but it probably these problems of how do you get your giant killing machine to work on a muddy hill will keep being unsolved, because they've been major problems for like military forces for decades. Muddy hills have been a very hard problem in warfare for a long time. So yeah, I mean, I think most of this is going to fail, but it's going to fail in pretty catastrophic ways for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you don't want to make this seem like an inevitable process of history or some bullshit. It's going to be, it could fail, but within that failure, 1 billion people could die like this in this
Right.
century.
I mean, right. And when
because of their failures.
Right. And when you add climate change to the equation, yeah, that looks like how it's probably going to go.
Right.
So, it's interesting that you say that you have no solutions, Elizabeth, because like maybe on the like practical political level, not, but I did actually detect something like a utopian horizon in the piece, in the way that you talked about the third thing that you reviewed, which was a series of novels. You focused on one, but you kind of talked about the whole series by a writer called Q. I think that's how we say her name. I'm not 100% certain on that, so feel free to correct me. But what I kind of, at least the way that I read the piece, that's a kind of that felt like a more kind of like the horizon of like what cyberpunk could be, that if the genre took a different path, and maybe like that culture, producing that kind of culture might be a way of beginning us moving in the right direction. What attracted you to those novels, and why, and what are they about, and why?
Right. Well, the first thing that attracted them to me is that they're by a queer woman in Thailand. I believe she's Thai. And that's just a different perspective on cyberpunk, and she is aggressively and at times curmudgeonly just uninterested in Western cyberpunk. She has no real time for interest in Gibson and Stevenson. She's drawing entirely on the Japanese tradition of cyberpunk, which is its own like separate, obviously very much influenced by the US one, just as the US one is very influenced by the Japanese one, but it is its own discrete thing that did some very different things from Gibson and Stevenson and Shirley and all those people.
Like Akira Ghost in the Shell, that kind of thing.
Right, Akira Ghost in the Shell, and a lot more obscure stuff. Like those are kind of the big two that everyone knows, but through mostly anime, but also film and novels, there was just an entirely distinct Japanese cyberpunk genre that in places is entirely different. Like Japanese cyberpunk as a genre, some people argue refers to like exclusively stuff like Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is very, very different from William Gibson. And you should check it out, knowing nothing else about it than that.
Cool. Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yeah. It's an experience.
Would you know something like Serial Experiments Lane as being kind of in this universe as well?
Yeah. I mean, if it's a piece of anime, yes, it's from this universe. It's from this Japanese, this separate cultural tradition of cyberpunk. And there's a lot of interesting things in it. It is less interested in the idea of heroic rebellion in American cyberpunk. There's a lot fewer kind of messianic hacker figures in it. It tends to be much more, it has a post-colonial perspective, because a lot of it is very much concerned with Japan's own experience being completely, economically colonized and heavily restructured by the United States after World War II. It's written by people who have had an atom bomb dropped on it. Like, I mean, the opening 10 seconds of Akira are Tokyo being nuked. And that's a very, very clear anxiety that does not come from American culture being expressed there. So, it's got a very different set of cultural assumptions. I don't want to say that, I don't want to fall into a lazy trap of, and these are the good assumptions or anything like that. Especially, as a white woman, I don't really want to make essentialist claims about Japanese culture and Japanese cyberpunk in general. I want to be careful there, but it is a distinct alternative presentation of cyberpunk. And in the triple article, I kind of find dead ends in Devs and Cyberpunk 2077, and I turn to these novels precisely because they offer an entirely different take on cyberpunk, one that is playing with different iconography, one that is playing with different cultural assumptions, one that has fundamentally different concerns. And that does get toward kind of my utopian solution of get some different ideas that survive the upcoming turmoil and awfulness, and lose this round as we appear to be going to lose it, but try not to die completely and win a few rounds down the timeline, as it were. And I think turn to these ideas from outside that culture.
So what does Stronticu do that interested you so much and caught your attention? Like what are her novels about, and like how do they achieve their effects?
Right. They are admittedly, I'm now going back to novels I read a year ago because this is a slightly older piece. They have a lot of focus on systems of control. The one I focus the most on, the kind of novel length one, as opposed to the subsequent novellas, is a very soft dystopia. It's a dystopian world, but it isn't as loud. It's a dystopian world where life is good for citizens of the dystopia most of the time. Mm-hmm. The bad stuff is if you're not a citizen of that dystopian planet. And the main character is basically an immigration officer, a person who is tasked with deciding who gets to join or not join the society. And then the other main character is a long ago victim of that society who has successfully taken on a new identity and is infiltrating the society. So, she's focused very much on generational trauma, on colonialism, on on living under imperialist regimes. And then she ends up focused on the powers of sapphic love, and particularly vicious and cruel butch women to subvert these paradigms. She ends up with a kind of refreshing horniness. At the end of the day, she does decide that utopia will be horny, which is a perfectly good solution. Certainly it has some novelty value that I think is worth exploring. So yeah, that's sort of where she goes, and where I find some, toward the end of the essay, interesting possibilities.
I just found this blog quote that you used in the essay to be so funny, as in order to kind of like convey to people like what this horniness sounds like. She's at one point making fun of the Pax Americana in the setting, kind of like the and it's kind of like those who think that gestating tanks are Satan's technology and the gay couples can't reproduce recognize just two genders, you see, and even then under strict definitions. Breeding camps run by nuns, if you can credit the thought. They hand out little Bibles to every new intake.
She has some pretty biting angry satire of the US, but it's also just like, you can read any one of her novels and at some point, someone will secretly turn out to be a angry warlord from a oppressed culture who is seeking bloodthirsty revenge. Spoilers, it is almost certainly the most butch character in the novel who this is going to happen to. And she just like keeps returning to this trope, the incredibly sexy, butch, vengeful warlord from an oppressed society. Which, like, clearly this is a fetish.
Right. Every writer has their psychosexual obsessions, you know?
But this is an interesting psychosexual obsession, especially if you come to it after a whole lot of, leather jackets and mirror shades. It is certainly a much more as a psychosexual obsession, it is a lot more interesting than Johnny Silverhand's.
It's like the opposite of dad rock, but I'm not sure what that is, what one could call it. It's like maybe like 100 gecs instead of dad rock.
Right, or like, trans girls on Bandcamp doing weird ambient electronica.
So maybe now's a good time to open up. We've all been talking a lot. But we've had in the chat already a bunch of questions and comments. And people I think can probably feel free to make more. How do we want to do this? Francis, you've kind of been master of the chat until now. So how do you want to do this?
Well, why don't we pick up on Stephen Chavero's question or comments rather, since we've just been talking about machine class testament, etc., or machine mandate.
Right. Also, I know Stephen, and he's brilliant and wonderful, and any question he has is worth addressing.
Oh, wonderful.
Ah. Well, do you want to read it all?
Yeah, I'll read it. So the novellas we're talking about, the machine mandate series, he says, they have this sapphic horniness Elizabeth is talking about, but also an idea of mortality. And yeah, I think that's really important. Not just the idea of mortality, but the idea of mortality as a source of trauma. Almost all of these butch warlords have suffered terrible losses, really traumatic, bloody losses, families, cultures absolutely wiped out by oppression. So, you have a sex death dynamic going on here. The erotic becomes precious as a mode of resisting death, even when it is queer eroticism. I mean, especially when it is queer eroticism. The passage JMC quoted about reproduction in Pax Americana, it becomes this sort of queer eroticism versus death, which is hugely theorized in queer theory. There's tons of writing about this. But yeah, that's very much the dynamic, is a kind of sex/life versus imperialism/death.
I wanted to respond to something that I saw a while ago, and I just found it again. Commenter Wittgens, I think short for Wittgenstein, which thumbs up, nice taste in philosophers. Most tech bros settle for inventing bad versions of things like trains or vending machines. Yudkowsky is brave enough to invent bad versions of Pascal's wager or Calvinist predestination. And I completely agree with that. That is completely 110% correct. And I would just add to it that this is my frustration I'm a literature guy. I studied like humanities stuff in undergrad. I'm not a technologist, but my parents are both engineers. And specifically, my parents both worked for Bell Labs, which, for those who don't know, it did a lot of the basic research over the course of from the 50s to the 80s, and then eventually was broken up in the 90s. That kind of laid the foundations for modern telecommunications technology. The transistor was invented there. Unix was invented there.
Information theory was invented there.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things were invented there. In a lot of ways, we're still coasting off of the innovations that happened there. And the thing about it was that it was effectively a public agency with extra steps, because the Bell Telephone Company owned it, but and it was funded with infinite monopoly money, but because they were the only telephone company, but the government let them keep their monopoly in exchange for all of Bell's patents being public domain. So it was basically a government research agency, effectively, through that, this indirect kind of public-private partnership thing. And the thing about it is that the contrast with all except maybe Google and Intel, are doing research that's maybe at that level, but much more narrow and narrowly focused on making it products that they can make money off of. We don't have anything like Bell anymore. That's the closest that we have. and we just don't have anything. My parents tell me stories, you know, about, because, you know, obviously the engineers were kind of second-class citizens compared to the scientists. You had like, you know, Shannon running around and doing like crazy theories, or Kernahan or whatever, and then they would just hand it off to the engineers, like, here, build this. So it, you know, but nevertheless, like, you know, my parents would tell me stories about like how like they would get together in groups and just daydream about like, how could we do this? And then it becomes a project, and then suddenly a new technology would be developed over the course of several years after what initially was just a side project with people on the ping pong table talking about stuff. And like, we don't have anything like that. And these people who I meet at like these parties who are like Valley people, they're like cosplaying that. Like Elon Musk is cosplaying like a 19th century titan of industry, industrialist, but he doesn't know how to build anything. He doesn't know how to mass produce cars, much less become like, you know, the emperor of Mars who terraforms it and then lives forever along with his buddy Peter by like sucking the blood of like 16-year-olds. Like it's just not going to happen. These people don't know how to make it happen because, like, you know, I have heard stories about the sorts of people who know how to make new technologies happen, and it is not them. They are frauds and hucksters.
I mean, Peter Thiel in particular, he has this book 0 to 1 where he talks about his theories of how innovation happens, and it falls apart under slight scrutiny. But he has a big riff he likes going on. He goes on a similar version when he I think his speech at the 2016 Republican convention, where he talks about how like we don't have these big, massive scientific advances like NASA had anymore. What's wrong with America that we don't do this? And what he completely misses, as you point out, is that things like NASA and the development of the internet took place in these kind of sequestered environments that weren't focused on profit. And exactly the thing that Peter Thiel wants to generate, wants to foster, which is corporate profit and money making ideas, are exactly where you get stupid bullshit that iterates on old concepts destructively but profitably, as opposed to creating the internet.
I think about that thing that Peter Thiel says about a last mover advantage. That the goal is not to be the person who's the first to enter a marketplace with a new disruptive idea, but to be the one that closes out the marketplace and doesn't allow further disruption of that marketplace. And it's kind of interesting because he's proposing as part of his model of innovation the death of innovation itself. Like you don't even need to, like, it's not even scrutiny. You just need to like finish the sentence. And
right. Right. I mean, but he doesn't seem aware of the contradiction. Like he wants to make this 0 to 1 innovation while also recognizing that first movers rarely actually win the marketplace. And that he never resolves that. He seems totally oblivious to this. Because again, to return to my longstanding hypothesis about Peter Thiel, he is very stupid.
A question from the audience, nfoltz _ thank you. What is it about cyberpunk that the satire is lost on these tech bros?
I think it's less about cyberpunk and more about cyberpunk dystopias are only dystopian if you don't have a lot of money, and they do. So
that's fair. That's fair. I mean, like,
if you
that's
have
fair
a
to
couple
say,
$billion and you read Neuromancer, the people who are like you have it great. Why wouldn't you want to live in the world of Neuromancer if you have billions of dollars?
I guess you're right. So that, like, the classic piece of political commentary, like, how did this fail? No, it didn't fail. The people who made the decisions won.
Yes.
I think the political economy of Silicon Valley might offer a potential answer to refine it a bit, is like the early seed funding rounds and the Y Combinator groups and Sequoia Capital are just controlled by readers of longtime readers of Cyberpunk who are also older, and not to be generationalist or anything, but aging Gen X people and boomers who whisper into the ears of 36 and 37-year-old founders who have surely read Cyberpunk on their own. But I think that's just kind of a toxic mixture where you're going to get, they want to close they don't want to be the first mover. They don't want to be the last mover to close the industry and maintain a moat, which is what equity analysts look for in an IPO when they eventually do that, like 10 years later.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's telling that Peter Thiel's two profitable ideas came when his absurd, unworkable ideas about digital currency were bailed out by the fact that it happened to be really useful for solving a problem that eBay had, which is how he made all of his money on PayPal. And then subsequently, he's made a lot of money riding the defense contracting gravy train in exactly the sort of way that his ideology says shouldn't happen.
Right.
And other than that, all of his ideas haven't worked.
Yeah.
But his true ideology, right? Like, you know, and this is what's interesting as he's moved away from libertarianism and more towards, I mean, becoming, it seems like a big ideological supporter and possibly a financial supporter of national conservatism, which for me is this kind of crypto.
No possibility about it. He's absolutely funding.
Yeah. I wanted to keep it because it's technically not proven, but like most people speculate that it's him. What's interesting is that for me, that transition when he was kind of beginning to do his anti-democracy act was really telling. He did this little essay where he famously declares that liberty and democracy are no longer compatible. And that only makes sense if you have defined liberty as the ability of rich people who live off capital gains to do as they please with their money and turn anything into an asset. And
right. I mean, it's the classic old school Austrian school economics where the only actual freedom that matters is free markets.
Yeah,
right.
Liberty of property, not liberty of people.
But see, even then, I think that the free markets don't matter because this is what I'm getting at with the contractor thing. If the rich people are able to exercise their freedom by getting into like basically endless subsidy from the government in exchange for providing them with like services for the military industrial complex, that's fine too, because ultimately you can throw free markets out the door as long as the rich people are in charge and able to do what they want with their money. And that's why Palladium wants to get rid of democracy and replace it with like, a country that's run like Singapore or China under the CCP, except that instead of like instead of the Communist Party or a developmentalist party state, you have a committee of tech billionaires running everything. I mean, that's literally their program. I mean, they say it. I'm being irreverent about it, but that's basically what they say in their magazine. Like, and that's why these people have these ideologies, in my opinion, is because like ultimately they don't even care about free markets or any of these other kinds of intellectual constructs that they use to justify themselves. What they really care about is their ability to do as they please and control resources and labor power.
Yeah.
We have another audience question that's been burning a hole in my pocket, and so want to get it out there. From Tim F888, who I'm guessing is Tim Fung. I'm wondering what Elizabeth thinks of Robert Evans' latest novel, After the Revolution, if it qualifies as cyberpunk and perhaps a new direction for the aesthetic. Yes.
I have to offer the entirely disappointing answer that I haven't read the novel and don't know anything about it.
It was kind of burning a hole in my pocket because I read it quite recently, and I think that at a very basic level, it does qualify as cyberpunk.
What is it about? Like,
yes. It's set maybe 50 years in the future, and the U.S. Developed a super soldier program that, and some of their super soldiers turned terrorist. And this led somewhat quickly to the total fracturing of the United States into several sub-countries. It is set mostly in Texas, which is a sort of United Nation, sort of like almost UN-style organization. Not our UN, but a series of states that are loosely allied with each other, trying to hold off theo-fascists from the Midwest. And it follows a couple of characters, one of whom is one of these super soldiers. Who, the super soldiers all are extremely cyberpunk, I think, is kind of the reason why it's most regarded. Is that they're...
Yeah, I mean, if you get away from cyberpunk took a while to fully coalesce around computers and the internet as the key thing. And if you look at the early days of cyberpunk, there's a lot of focus instead on like cybernetic augmentation, genetic
Yeah.
engineering, stuff like that. So no, I can absolutely see how that novel would fit into a cyberpunk tradition as you described it.
Yeah, and it concerns kind of a lot of the plot is that the sort of rump state of the actual U.S. centered around like Virginia to New York. A girl in there has become a fundamentalist Christian, and she's trying to smuggle herself into the Christian fundamentalist state, and the sort of like IT cyberpunk shit she has to do to escape from the oppression of not being turned into a baby machine.
Nice. No, I will try to check that out.
It's very pulpy, I will say that. It's
All
fun.
right.
It's very, very pulpy. It's not the most like intellectual novel. I mean, Evans, I don't know if you know Evans' work. He's not.
I don't especially know.
Oh, okay. He likes drugs and machetes.
All right, no, nothing wrong with drugs and machetes. I've enjoyed both in my time.
Related to the Evans question, I wanted to kind of supplement that with, I think I'm going to mix together a couple of questions and comments because they're all on a very similar theme. Also, we only have 10 minutes left, so this would let us neatly answer everything that's left. So Stephen Shapiro asked at the beginning, one question that comes to mind: what about the visuals of cyberpunk? The novels find their analogs in Blade Runner and then The Matrix. It is a future that itself is totally retro at this point. Nobody has developed any different visuals of the future. Tim remarks as well, it's almost like cyberpunk was written by the hippie era guys who still kept on partying and being weird through the 70s and 80s. So again, this kind of question of the aesthetics. Later on, there's an exchange between like Francis running the account and Stephen Shapiro. So Francis says that devs, the aesthetics that we were just discussing in the devs show is quite a departure from the Matrix and Blade Runner. Stephen follows up, yes, but that has nothing to do with how, as Elizabeth says, most of the look of the series is just contemporary, and the futuristic set piece place in devs also seems to resemble contemporary Power Center, as was said. And it's a reflection of the period's aesthetics. The trouble is that a newer aesthetic hasn't been sufficiently developed. So I feel like a lot of that discussion revolves around the question of like, what could a cyberpunk aesthetic look like that is not just kind of riffing off of these like, Neo Tokyo or LA with the, billboards kind of aesthetic of the 80s. Like what would the next visual and just general vibe sense of cyberpunk, what might it look like? What resources could it draw upon?
Right. I mean, I would look to basically anything that isn't the Bay Area, New York City, or Tokyo. If you rule like those three out, you're probably going to find some interesting possibilities.
Neo-Columbus.
Right. Like I think that if I were to go about building a all new cyberpunk aesthetic, Mumbai might be a really interesting place to start, given that, given how much of the tech support and sort of remote satellite locations of tech companies have been built in India. I think building cyberpunk out of that
Hyderabad is already a very cyberpunk city. Sorry to interrupt you. Hyderabad is,
yeah, you've got a lot of possibilities there. I can't imagine there aren't some interesting possibilities to do out of China.
Mm-hmm.
I think almost certainly there's some great options out of Latin America. Just pick anything really that is in America or Japan, and you'll probably get some interesting possibilities. But in the essay, what I ultimately end up coming around to is finding myself sort of charmed by the kitschy retro vibe of your good old-fashioned leather jacket and mirror shades that, in its cliched retro qualities, there's a certain possibility that possibly just, donning a leather jacket, slipping on a pair of mirror shades and deciding to be a revolutionary hacker could well be an interesting move in 2022, given that nobody actually does that.
Yeah, what is old?
I mean, I've got my mirror visor and gas mask right behind me. So.
Right, like you're all set. You know exactly what to do when this Zoom call ends. Yeah, no, I think that there's a degree to which those retro vibes have acquired some new possibility precisely because they are absurd now. precisely because they would be such a cliche move as to be unexpected. Specifically, they're kind of the cliche that nobody is going for. To try and get back to my dismay and frustration at the lack of revolutionary response to the Trump administration and the way in which it kind of dramatically revised downward my belief that revolutionary possibilities might actually manifest. Maybe slipping on some, maybe just being that kind of rebellious hacker figure is exactly the thing to do. It might just be as simple as defiantly embracing revolutionary aesthetics. And I think Cyberpunk does leave some opportunities for that. And, there are always worse moves than sadistically and productively playing the clown. And if cyberpunk aesthetics have become a bit clownish, silly, and cartoonish, that doesn't have to be a disadvantage.
We just need to overcome cringe.
Yeah, no, cringe is the enemy, or at least embarrassment over it is.
I love the phrase,
Yeah.
I'm cringe, but I'm free.
Yeah, I mean,
So something like that.
I talked about, to bring us way back to the beginning of the conversation, working in a chapter in my British comics thing about like cringy trans erotica of the internet erotica of the mid 90s. Coming out of a trans and queer culture, the revolutionary possibilities of cringe are something you really have to embrace fast if you're getting into trans aesthetics. I not to throw my community under the bus here, but we are very cringe very often.
Sometimes I want to blame this here for having defined cringe.
No, I'm going to go ahead and say that like the cringe.
You're less forgiving than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I can make the critique in community. No, but I think that there's a real. I think in terms of trans aesthetics, fundamentally going out as a trans woman for the first time early in your transition when you don't pass for shit is cringe. Every trans person has had to look cringe in the eyes and decide that it is an acceptable price for one's own survival. That's just a fundamental part of the kind of horror and stress of early transition. I think that there's probably something there. That's an observation that could probably be built out if, say, you wanted another triple on some like trans culture and aesthetics. I could probably make that happen for you.
I think that that's a wonderful note to end on, because I know, Elizabeth, you have to run, and thank you so much for the being so generous with your time. And
oh no, this was an absolute hoot. I enjoyed it.
This was lovely. I'd love to do more of these with you anytime. I feel
so
energized.
I'll tell you what, hire me for another article and I'll happily do one of these to talk about.
That
only one for one.
And
one
thank
for
you,
one. We can't talk you up to like a multi to one ratio here.
Thank you to everyone who showed up. This was really amazing event. You asked wonderful questions. So just next steps is our fundraiser starts on March 1st. So if Elizabeth's article, which you can read on her Patreon if you donate to her, and if not, it'll probably be up at some point during the fundraiser. It's going to last. Our fundraiser for Strange Matters magazine is going to be from March 1st to around mid-April. I forget the date that it ends. And if you could just tell all your friends, I mean, if you really like this, there's way more of it. There's many other articles that are really excellent. So if you want to support us in any way you can, that would be awesome financially. And if you can't support us financially, that's okay too. Just tell all your friends and share our stuff, and try to get it in front of as many eyeballs as possible, because the writing of amazing writers like Elizabeth Sanderfer deserves as big an audience as possible, particularly because it's the kind of thing that you can't find anywhere else.
Tell your enemies and the people you don't know too. Just like go out in the street and yell at people about it.
If the people who if you're putting away the people who hate your writing, that's half the money on the table.
No.
Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Yeah.
Right.
You know, there would be nothing more tragic than for these articles to not be read by as many people as possible.
Absolutely. And is there anything else? Am I missing any business? I don't think so.
I just want to talk more about Cyberpunk. I've been in a
I
long
know.
discussion about Cyborg for days now, and I wanted to get on that, and we didn't even touch it. I had so many thoughts about how like TTRPGs continue to be like so driving and important to the Cyberpunk community, and like
Yes.
that they don't for like other things. Like
Yes.
Cyberpunk Red has interesting things to say today.
That's true.
Yeah.
William Gibson's hatred for Shadowrun is an incredible piece of cultural artifact. You fucking hate Shadowrun so much. It's
Yes.
incredible.
Right,
But
Shadowrun.
even into it, it's so rich.
Tim says, "Long live Shadowrun."
Yeah.
And what's great too is keep your eye out for Kyle's piece, which is excellent, about a certain kind of board game, not tabletop games, and specifically looking at board games like Settlers of Catan from a decolonial perspective. So that's going to be out in the wild soon as well.
I will probably write something about Cyberpunk TTRPGs for at a future point, because now I'm enthralled by this. I'm enthralled by like the fact that one of the most important features of Cyberpunk Red is having an anarchist doctor who can install cyberware without like turning you over to the cops. Like,
so cool.
I love this stuff. But again, this was incredible. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to all of our audience for coming here. And I love you all, and good night, I suppose.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
That was awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much,
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Okay, yeah.